All right, Toren, it's a pleasure to have you here,
Oh,
man.
thank you.
So, for context for us, give us a little bit of a spiel of who you are, what is it that you do, and we'll dive into KESA in a little bit, but you go on that first.
Yeah, so I'm a mixed media artist and the owner and founder of KESA, which is the first Black-owned and operated content agency in my hometown of Rochester, New York.
I love it, man. And you have an agency, but you also are into education too. Can you like break out what specifically you do at KESA? Because you're like threefold. You have merch, you have amazing fashion line that you are sporting today
Oh, yeah,
as
thank
you
you.
crossed your legs
Yeah.
and give us some of that. You also are, you do amazing service work for your clients and customers,
thank
but you impact immensely in your local area and beyond that.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of a insider what came first, and then I'll just let you take the story, take the reel on this.
What came first in terms of like the outreach work or the branding or the agency work?
I guess when you started your agency, did it start as an education thing? Were you setting out to impact in the education space?
Yeah.
Or was it service first? Was it merch first?
To me, it's all one thing, and so I've always tried to live by example, not just professionally, but outside of the scope of work.
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of the democratization of skills and the resources or access to resources. And so when I started KESA, I really wanted to prove, especially to my hometown, that there's a ton of talent that doesn't necessarily look like the traditional homogenous creative that I think a lot of agencies kind of have in their minds when they're looking to hire somebody.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to spotlight who those people are and validate the work that they've already done, whether they realize it's work or not. And also kind of act as a bridge between those BIPOC creatives or creatives from non-traditional backgrounds to agencies, because I really want as many people as possible to build fulfilling careers. Before I started doing any of the creative work or working at agencies myself, I was a teacher for at-risk youth in Rochester, so kids who wanted to get their GED essentially.
Yeah.
And so I was 21 years old, 22 years old, teaching kids, as young as 16 and as old as 28, how to read or how to do math. And what I realized in my time as a teacher in that capacity was, one, these kids were heartbreakingly underserved by the community as a whole, and two, that they were special and talented and they had all the same vision that anybody else has, but they didn't have the opportunity to do it. And because of the lack of being seen from a professional standpoint, here they were just trying to get their GED so they could get like a part-time job. Like that was the aspiration to them. And I thought that the humility and what they were hoping to achieve, which was just a GED so they could work at a part-time fast food place. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just knew that they had so much more talent outside the scope of a traditional 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to inspire those kids and help those kids build a career that was as fulfilling as anybody else's is. And so I couldn't be more passionate about that work. So when it comes to KESA, I was working at agencies before, but it was as like a keyword search specialist or somebody who was optimizing ads for paid social, but I wasn't doing any of the creative work myself.
Yeah.
And so when I started, my very first post in April of 2020 was like, cool, like I'll do it on my own. And so I've been teaching myself one app in the Creative Cloud suite after another to accommodate for clients having certain requests. And as I've been teaching myself, I've wanted to also share that knowledge with as many people as possible, and then also proliferate their access to the Creative Cloud so that they too can do the same work. And so I'm very passionate about Photoshop being accessible in the browser and Adobe Express being accessible in the browser, because there's so many barriers to entry for creatives already, but one of them is just having the hardware to do it. And so when you have cloud-based programs like Photoshop and Express, now you're kind of, like I said, democratizing the access to professional tools. And I was teaching at a high school this past April. I was teaching a class on storytelling through apparel design.
Yeah.
And one of my kids towards the end was like, Mr. Reaves, how can I keep working on this stuff after this course ends? And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, I don't have a MacBook Pro. And I said, you can do Adobe Express like on any computer. And it killed me. He goes, I can keep doing this. And I was like, yeah, like you can keep working on this stuff. And so I think a lot of us, especially, in spaces like this, like we've all kind of made it already. And I think we take for granted some of those hurdles that we have to jump early on. And those are the sort of things like I'm trying to keep at front of mind for agencies. Like just because a kid doesn't have access to the tools to create the stuff that you're looking for doesn't mean that they don't have the vision or the creativity to do it. They just need a little help.
Yeah.
And so in teaching myself those tools and giving those resources to myself, I'm always trying to, send the elevator back down, as they say, or lift people up with me. So that's a very long, complicated answer to what was, a very pointed question. But
no,
that
this
stuff.
is an excellent conversation.
It matters a lot to me. I couldn't be more passionate about it. So when I say it's all one thing, it's like the work that I'm doing creatively. I want to speak to that demographic or any demographic, and then also teach them how I'm doing that work. Use it as R&D for other kids who are trying to get into this industry, and also hopefully a hook so that somebody who's in Rochester sees the work I'm doing and goes, oh, like I didn't know that you could navigate this space wearing sweatpants and Jordans, and yet here I am, at the biggest creative conference in the world in sweatpants and Jordans, like validating this approach. And so I'm not trying to undermine or diminish the traditional avenues that people take to becoming creative professionals. I just want to add to it. And so part of that means, being true to myself, even if it's in sweatpants and Jordans, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful to kind of like segue and steal
thank you.
A quote of yours. I pulled it off your website,
Oh.
but I hope, I'll be as accurate as possible. But you say you're never too young to learn what's possible.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love that. Like you are out here showing, like you said, you're here and you're retired. Some people don't think it's possible, and you're literally kind of like, not greenlighting, but you're showing, oh, I can, to people who are like you and who are in basically the younger versions of you. They're like, oh, I can do that too. And it kind of like shifts your mindset a little bit.
And not even so much that they can do it as well, but what they're already doing is a monetizable avenue for them. There are so many kids on Instagram who have this fluency in curating. We were talking earlier, and I think that if you were born before a certain time, I think the way that we thought of intelligence was the information that you're able to recite on command.
Yeah.
And then in our generation, it was the information that you were able to aggregate through the internet, like knowing how to ask Google a certain question to get information back. And I think now for these Gen Zers, they're served so much, they have to be able to curate in order to stand out, because most of what is being served is like almost kind of curated to them.
Yeah.
Like they kind of have to decide, like for them, like, okay, like if we're all getting served the same things, how do I stand out, picking from the same palette? And so kids today who are 15, 16, 17, 18, they are fluent in that skill set and being able to take something and differentiate themselves with it. And to me, that's at the heart of what a lot of us as professional creatives, especially in marketing, are trying to do for our clients, which is take their product and make it stand out in a way that resonates with people. And so that there are kids today who are growing up in the inner city who just do that on their own on Instagram or on TikTok and aren't even aware that that's like a coveted skill set. I've talked to a lot of people over the past few days here, and everybody's asking me, like, what do you think about TikTok? Like, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you, what are your plans for making TikTok work? And any 14-year-old is already killing it with millions of TikTok followers. They may not know that thing that they're doing is something every executive in here wants to harvest somehow. And so just by reaching out to those kids and letting them know that they have a commodity, just putting that on their radar to think about is something that I find or hope is empowering to them in the future.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about empowerment in general, because we were talking outside a little bit about like, what is that, the big word we were using was like support. How do we get the people, the individuals, the youngins, that foundation of like, I don't know exactly how to ask this, but the support that they need. Because we were talking about this outside, and I don't think we got to the conversation, but you were essentially saying you want to, with KESA, build that support for this community, your community.
Yeah.
What is, not only you, but like for the people who are watching, listening to this, like what is your, what would you like to say to those watching about like not only your mission, but what would you say to them? Like, hey, you really, you as, people who have influence, here's what I'm doing. It's not super difficult to also support this community, and here's actually the benefit for you to do so.
Yeah.
Like, can you shine some light on that?
I'd like to think of support as a dynamic concept. So
Yeah.
it depends on what vantage we're looking from and who we're looking towards through this prism of support. If I'm an agency looking to support my BIPOC employees, one thing is giving them the access to try different things, and if they necessarily don't succeed at those, that they don't feel like they're under the duress of being fired right away. Just simple as that. Another way to support is by not having just one or two Black employees have to bear the flag for all the other BIPOC creatives who aren't there.
Yeah.
At every agency I ever worked at, I was the only person of color in the entire building. And I'm sure that you've navigated spaces under the same pretense where you were the only one. And I don't think that people often take into account what pressure that puts on you, or the sneaking suspicion you have if somebody else gets promoted and you don't, kind of how that thought lingers in the back of your mind where it's like, well, why was it that I didn't get that promotion? And that's not fair to anybody involved. And so I think the more BIPOC or the more people of varying backgrounds you have working at an agency or working under your roof, the less of that is around. And also I think as professional creatives, we like to think of diversity as the content that ends up in the wild. Like, who are we putting in front of audiences? So are we using Black models or Black talent? Are we using trans models, trans talent? But I think if you hire with those demographics in mind, a lot of that end result takes care of itself. Where if you hire 15 BIPOC creatives, chances are you're going to wind up with some content with BIPOC in it, instead of trying to reverse engineer it where you're starting at the end goal, but you're not hiring in a way that reflects the content that you're putting out. So that's support in that dynamic. I think support for the actual creatives from my vantage point is, like I said before, living by example, sharing any knowledge that I have. Like if you DM me or if you want to grab coffee, I will tell you exactly how I did what I did. Like if you want to know what was the technique I used in Photoshop to achieve a certain effect, I will literally just tell you. I'm not holding anything behind a subscription fee or trying to monetize it. Whatever I know is completely open to whomever wants to know it. And you don't have to be a BIPOC creative in order to have that support from me. I don't care what your background is. I just want anything that I've taught myself to be out there to anybody who wants to learn it. So that's support in that sense. So yeah, just giving people opportunities, and then when they're there, supporting them, not just to succeed, but also giving them a safety net if and when they fail at something.
Gotcha. I love that. What was your biggest lesson?
I think
On this trip?
internally it was realizing or validating myself, and calling myself an artist. I shared with you earlier, I've thought of myself as a mixed media artist for a long time, but only very recently have I had the nerve to introduce myself that way. And kind of clearing that, because I am self-taught, because I feel like I'm throwing punches in the dark half the time, and having to figure things out. I always put the analogy, have you ever seen Wallace and Gromit?
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm putting the train tracks in front of the train, when it comes to achieving a certain goal or getting a certain project done, where I am literally teaching myself with a deadline behind me. And so overcoming the imposter syndrome is something I think I'm going to have to constantly work at, just because my background is so non-traditional. And I think externally, I think it's getting people or getting clients to trust that I know what I'm doing, and when I don't know what I'm doing, I'm capable of teaching myself. And if it doesn't go well, I'm not afraid of being held accountable for it. Like we were talking about earlier, I'm an MMA fighter, a jiu-jitsu black belt, an undefeated boxer and kickboxer. Those martial arts teach you pretty quickly about accountability. There's no faking it. You're either ready or you're not. And so I think that I've always been very gung-ho about you know, if I don't get something done, like I'm not gonna hide my hand or try to downplay
Yeah.
where there wasn't success, but kind of talk you through how I failed. And I think that that confidence hasn't always been met by clients in the way that they were like comfortable. It was like off-putting a little bit, so to speak. And so I think one hurdle that I'm still facing is just, you know, like I said, communicating to people that like I know what I'm doing, and being self-taught doesn't make me any less proficient at the things that they're looking for. And to be invited to, you know, an Adobe Max event, to be here on this platform with all these incredible, talented professionals here is more validation than I ever thought I would get, and way sooner than I could have ever hoped to get it. And so I'm incredibly grateful to the entire production staff. Like, I can't imagine how many ass whoopings y'all got between the day you started and now. You know, I'm blown away and inspired. Like, I want to ask everybody here a question about, you know, what tools you use for sound design, you know, what settings you use for your ISO with your camera. Like, I love learning. And to the production crew, like, I don't think you guys get enough credit for being geniuses at your craft and thought of as artists. I think sometimes you're looked at and treated as tools, and I see y'all for real. Like, I really do appreciate it. So likewise, thank you so much for having me here and for validating me and empowering me to introduce myself as a mixed media artist.
For sure, Toren. Thank you for being here, man.
Yeah.
All right, last rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
First job and what you're doing now.
First job, I was a PlayStation 1 onboarder at my local YMCA. And my current job, I think I spent the last 4 hours talking about. So yeah.
Next one, word of the day. Basically, the word of the day is an actual word in your industry. Define it, a popular word in your industry. And you're going to define it and use it in a sentence.
Validating. I think validating more artists, more mediums of art, you know, more creators. That's the stuff that I think is trending and should be trending, not just now, but moving forward.
All right, perfect. And last one is the Adobe's 40th happy birthday. Feel free to say happy birthday or sing it to the camera. But
I'm not going to put the people wearing headphones through me singing anything,
Yeah.
so happy birthday, Adobe.